On November 30th, 1939, Soviet artillery shelled the border village of Mayanila, fabricating a pretext for war that would pit the world's largest land empire against a small, peaceful republic. Joseph Stalin expected his massive Red Army to parade through the streets of Helsinki in less than 2 weeks. Instead, the Soviet invasion ignited a fierce conflict that fundamentally disrupted the global balance of power on the eve of the Second World War. The geopolitical landscape in late 1939 seemed entirely stacked against Finnish survival. Under the secret protocols of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Nazi Germany had quietly surrendered the Baltic region and Finland to the Soviet sphere of influence. Isolated without major foreign allies, Finland faced a titanic adversary possessing 20 times its population, a vast military-industrial base, and thousands of modern armored vehicles. Recognizing the futility of meeting the Red Army in open conventional combat, the Finnish High Command devised an asymmetric warfare strategy designed to exploit every harsh element of their native terrain. Field Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim understood that national survival depended not on crushing the invaders, but on making the cost of conquest impossibly high. His defense plan transformed Finland's dense forests, frozen lakes, and sub-zero climate into deadly defensive assets. At the heart of Finnish defense was the Mannerheim Line, an intricate series of field fortifications, concrete bunkers, and anti-tank barriers stretched across the Karelian Isthmus. Rather than relying on massive static fortresses like France's Maginot Line, Finnish engineers cleverly integrated natural granite boulders, wetlands, and thick forest belts into their defensive network. When Soviet infantry waves hurled themselves against these positions, the heavily fortified, naturally reinforced choke points exacted a staggering toll. Beyond the Karelian Isthmus, in the deep wilderness of central and northern Finland, the nature of the fighting shifted dramatically. Soviet motorized divisions, bound to narrow woodland roads by deep snowdrifts, stretched into vulnerable columns, extending dozens of miles. Out of the darkness, white camouflaged Finnish ski troops emerged silently from the forest, striking isolated units before melting back into the frozen expanse. The Finns perfected a devastating tactical doctrine known as the motti tactic, named after the woodcutter's unit of piled firewood. Finnish troops utilized extreme winter mobility to sever vulnerable Soviet supply lines, carving extended enemy columns into isolated, encircled pockets. Deprived of food, fuel, and ammunition in temperatures plunging below 40 degrees below zero, these trapped Red Army units were methodically worn down and annihilated piece by piece. To compensate for a severe lack of heavy anti-tank artillery, Finnish soldiers deployed improvised incendiary weapons, coining the iconic term Molotov cocktail as a sardonic tribute to the Soviet foreign minister. Packed with crude fuel mixtures and lit by storm matches, these hand-thrown devices neutralized hundreds of Soviet tanks navigating narrow forest paths. This improvised ingenuity transformed ordinary infantrymen into lethal tank destroyers, turning enemy armor into burning metal traps. As weeks turned into months, news of the heroic resistance sent shockwaves through major international capitals. The Soviet Union, once feared as an unstoppable military behemoth, suffered catastrophic embarrassments that shattered its global prestige. Observers in London and Paris began contemplating direct military intervention to support the small, outgunned nation, while Adolf Hitler drew dangerous conclusions regarding the fundamental weakness of Soviet military power. Had the Red Army succeeded in its original timeline, Finland would have suffered the total loss of sovereignty experienced by the Baltic states. Soviet forces would have established direct air and naval supremacy over the Baltic Sea, fundamentally altering Scandinavian security dynamics. The fierce resilience displayed along the Mannerheim Line altered that trajectory, preserving Finnish democratic institutions despite immense external pressures. The root of Soviet tactical ineptitude lay deeply anchored in Joseph Stalin's brutal military purges of the late 1930s. The execution and imprisonment of thousands of senior officers had stripped the Red Army of experienced leadership, operational initiative, and independent tactical thinking. Subordinate commanders, terrified of political execution, strictly adhered to rigid, flawed invasion plans, even when faced with immediate tactical disaster. For the average Soviet soldier drafted from warm southern provinces, the Winter War was a horrific descent into a frozen hell. Clad in inadequate summer uniforms and lacking winter survival gear, tens of thousands succumbed to extreme frostbite long before reaching enemy positions. The frozen forests became vast graveyards where entire Soviet regiments froze in place beside their idling vehicles. Finnish snipers, leveraging unmatched marksmanship and supreme camouflage, psychologically terrorized the invading forces along the entire front. Expert marksmen like Simo Heiha operated independently in sub-zero conditions, using iron sights to eliminate key Soviet personnel without revealing their position. This relentless sniper pressure demoralized frontline Soviet units, forcing entire platoons into defensive paralysis under the constant threat of unseen precision fire. Despite early operational brilliance, Finland faced an agonizing strategic dilemma rooted in manpower exhaustion and finite material resources. While asymmetric tactics produced unbelievable kill ratios, every Finnish casualty represented an irreplaceable loss to a small nation of just 3.5 million people. By February 1940, Finnish artillery units faced severe shell shortages, and defensive lines were stretched to the absolute breaking point. Realizing the profound embarrassment of early failures, Soviet leadership reorganized its high command, placing General Semyon Timoshenko in charge of the campaign. Timoshenko abandoned reckless multi-pronged wilderness thrusts and concentrated vast armies, heavy artillery, and dense armor directly onto the Karelian Isthmus. The Soviet war machine mobilized massive reserves, preparing for a brutal war of attrition aimed at pulverizing the Mannerheim Line through overwhelming power. The final Soviet offensive in mid-February descended into an apocalyptic duel of fire and steel. Thousands of Soviet heavy guns bombarded Finnish positions around Suma for days, reducing concrete bunkers to dust and landscape to cratered mud. Finnish defenders fought with desperate bravery, but sheer weight of numbers eventually pierced the primary defensive lines, forcing a tactical retreat to rearward positions. Confronted with imminent line collapse and lack of immediate Western Allied support, Finnish leaders made the painful decision to negotiate peace terms. On March 13, 1940, the Moscow Peace Treaty officially concluded the Winter War after 105 harrowing days. Finland ceded 11% of its territory, including the Karelian Isthmus and vital industrial centers, but preserved its national independence and sovereign government. The human cost of the invasion was profoundly disproportionate, reflecting the efficacy of asymmetric warfare against rigid mass armies. The Soviet Union suffered over 300,000 casualties, including more than 100,000 dead, while Finnish casualties totaled roughly 70,000. The strategic miscalculation exposed deep operational flaws within Soviet doctrine, forcing urgent internal reforms before the inevitable clash with Nazi Germany. The geopolitical echoes of the Winter War resonated directly into the decisive battles of the Eastern Front. Hitler's perception of Soviet military incompetence directly influenced his decision to launch Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, mistakenly believing the Soviet state would collapse like a house of cards. Furthermore, Finland's territorial losses pushed the nation into a fraught, pragmatic alliance with Germany to reclaim lost lands during the continuation war. For military strategists worldwide, Finland's performance became a classic textbook study in defense economics and terrain exploitation. It demonstrated how force multiplier concepts, high operational mobility, and deep localized knowledge could neutralize overwhelming numerical and technological superiority. The motti operations proved that an agile defense can turn an attacker's massive logistical footprint into their ultimate vulnerability. Without the fierce resistance waged across the snowbound battlefields of 1939, Northern Europe's strategic identity during the Cold War would have been unrecognizable. By preserving its independence, Finland established a unique geopolitical stance of military non-alignment combined with total societal readiness. The memory of the Winter War became the foundational cornerstone of modern Finnish national identity and defense strategy. Ultimately, the Winter War stands as an enduring testament to the power of national unity and tactical innovation against impossible odds. In 105 winter days, a small outgunned nation reshaped global military history, proving that resolve and strategic adaptability can challenge the might of empires. The legacy of that frozen confrontation continues to remind the world that victory is never guaranteed by size alone.